First board meeting, met the stakeholders, met the investors, founders were there, went through numbers, looked at projections. It's like, hang on a minute, surely there's another page here. We're going to turn over one more page and it's all going to be all right. But it wasn't. You actually find yourself in kind of a turnaround environment, which is, oh my God, everyone's hair's on fire. There's organizational malaise. There's silos within the business units. And it's like, how do you talk about the harsh realities of what you're finding and still keep a team motivated and deliver on the revenue targets that you've got? 45 years old, sadly died very suddenly, just 3 months into this country pursuit business that he'd invested in, and it was his dream. You don't really grieve. You're just thinking, oh my God, how do we deal with this? It's my father's legacy, and so we gave it a go. It's probably the most present I've ever been in my entire life. I'm sitting there fishing with Ray Kelvin. He was inspired to set up the Ted Baker brand whilst fishing. This amazing entrepreneur sitting there telling me how stuff works. When you get those stories from people and you're sitting on a bit of land and you feel static, you want to get out there and do stuff, you know? I've got to do stuff. I've got to do more. It's got to be more than this. They are very different environments. Are you really thinking through what you're stepping into? Have you got the tools to succeed? Are you the right kind of person for that role? Well, the grief caught up with me. I just broke down. What am I doing here? This isn't my life. You do these things for love and you do these things because it's your family and it's a privilege to do these things. And so had a chat with my mum. She was amazing. She was like, look, you have to go and do what you want to do. Go on, boy. Here's your little spotted handkerchief. Go and live your life, you know, and off I went.
Welcome to the iGaming Leader podcast, where we uncover the human side of some of the most inspirational leaders in our industry. I'm your host, Leo Judkins, and as an ex-iGaming director turned performance coach, I've worked with over 200 leaders from companies like Entain, 365, Flutter, and many more to help them build the habits to achieve sustainable high performance. In these episodes, we share exactly what it takes for you to achieve the same. So with that being said, let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome to the iGaming Leader podcast. I am here with Ian Freeman. Ian's been the CCO and CRO at Kambi, IGT, FSB. He's led IBOs and global transformation, but Ian's leadership wasn't forged in the boardroom. It was forged in a crisis at 20. Today, we're going to talk about the bait and switch of the C-suite and what it actually costs a human to prepare a business for exit. So, Ian, really glad to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Leo. That's the great expression, bait and switch. I like that. That's well. I was part of the management team at Kambi that went through the IPO process. It was very much led by Christian Nyland. So, but thank you for putting that on me. That's very kind.
I want to start with your dad, if that's all right. So it's a beginning for most people, right? Where our fathers have been real influence on how we do business and how they shape our careers. Your dad has had a profound impact on your career as well. But most mentors at 20, you were carrying his debt and a business that wasn't your dream. Take us back to that situation in your 20s and what that looked like. I'd love to start there, if that's okay for you.
Do you know what, Leo? As you're speaking, I'm getting tingling sensations of somebody else talking about my father. It's a weird sensation. It just runs through your body. It's like a little bit of electricity. So happy to talk about that. Look, I mean, yeah, it was really sad. 45 years old, just 3 months into this country pursuit business that he had invested in, and it was his dream. Sadly died very suddenly. This happens tragically, and I'm not the only person to experience this. But I think it was quite formative for me and my family. We had some choices at that time. He'd invested a lot of capital into the business. There was an equity gap. Of course, his income had gone, and we couldn't cover it between us. The question was, do we sell, which would have left my mum in a bad place, quite honestly, or do we try to do something with this business? And at that time, it was a kind of complicated because you're grieving. Is that you don't really grieve. You're just thinking, oh my God, how do we deal with this? This is a situation nobody expected. I said, look, Mum, I think we can do this. Let's give it a go. It's survive and thrive, or do we fail? And it feels like we're going to diminish. And it's my father's legacy. She was brilliant. She's like, look, I back you. Let's just give it a go. I mean, she's amazing. And she'd worked with him over the years. They set up a few businesses. You know, she was like the COO to his entrepreneurial character. Do you know what I mean? And he left school at 14. He was trained as a carpenter, didn't have money. Do you know what I mean? And just try to make stuff happen. And he used to take me on his business trips when I was a teenager, and I'd hear him speaking pidgin French in Belgium and in France. It was just brilliant. You know, he was just like, wow, he's just in awe of this stuff, you know. He just made stuff happen, and it was a shock. We were all so shocked. And we found ourselves trying to set up this business. The idea was to set up corporate days for fishing, a bit of shooting. There was some property that was going to be retail. There was property that was going to be sort of catering and all of that kind of stuff. But it was embryonic and it wasn't started. And so we gave it a go. The funny thing is, Leo, in that time, you don't think about anything in a linear sense. You're just surviving. It's probably the most present I've ever been in my entire life, because you're just doing it. You're doing it for love, for legacy, for something that is a greater good. You couldn't really see that it was going to create a huge amount of wealth for anybody. It was more of a lifestyle business. In the moment, as a family, the three of us, my sister and my mother, and I don't think we ever had the chance to really process it. We were sort of, oh my God, how do we deal with this? It's like land and fish and livestock and dead stock. It was just like, what is all of this? Because it was very much his thing. But the chance to create something in his name, we very much did that. We built some brick piers and put a plaque up there for him. We did a lot of things in honor of him. It was just a privilege to do that. It was a way of staying attached to him and attached to what he represented. I think that idea of growth, entrepreneurship, and anything's possible. You can go out there and make stuff happen. That was him. That was definitely him. But the key was we wanted to help my mother and make sure she had this retirement. It was a privilege to do it, honestly. But I was just 2 years into it. We set up the infrastructure, dealt with all the bank managers and learned the operational procedures. We marketed the business, ground roots. How do you set up a small business? Then all the grief caught up with me. I just broke down, sobbing. What am I doing here? This isn't my life. You do these things for love, and you do these things because it's your family, and it's a privilege to do these things. But I started to feel detached and really unhappy in this space. It was just too much too soon. And I didn't see that I could do more than I'd done in a way that was going to make everyone happy. Had a chat with my mum. She was amazing. She was like, look, you have to go and do what you want to do. You've got to do it. Go on, boy. Here's your little spotted handkerchief. Go and live your life. And off I went. So yeah, it was very, very formative for me. All of that. He was amazing. But it was extremely formative because you always want to replicate what your parents have done, or in some way, if you had that kind of upbringing, you want to be like your dad. And I guess I wanted to be like my dad.
I love it, Ian. Thank you for sharing that. And how was that moment of deciding to let go? That must have been heartbreaking as well, because it's like leaving this last bit that you feel you've got left, building that legacy. From what I read and what we discussed, you tried to create it into a scalable business or into a business that you could move away from. How was that letting go?
It was really hard. I don't think I've even let go of it now. It was really formative. It's imprinted. It was blood, sweat and tears building that business. But it was so unconscious, Leo, that it was more driven than it was so unconscious. This is not my life. So you have to move on and do something else. And yes, it's very painful. It always stays with you. But the learning that you got from that and the empowerment that my mother gave me to trust me to be able to do that, I think all of the learnings from powering on through, setting up all of the different micro elements of that business, learning to deal with customers. Oh my God, who wants to deal with the public? Learning to set up corporate days. We had Ted Baker come down one day, Ray Kelvin with his group from North London, and we had a fishing day and a barnyard day, straw bales lying around and a bit of music. And we treated them to this kind of country day, and it was fantastic. And so you have moments like that where it feels like a dream. I'm sitting there fishing with Ray Kelvin, who is Ted Baker. He told me the story that actually, when he was inspired to set up the Ted Baker brand whilst fishing, which is why he always takes his team to a fishing event. For him, the reflection time, the Zen-like experience he had while he was fishing helped him come up with this idea, Ted Baker, the name of Ted Baker. I knew he wanted to do a men's clothing brand, how to position it. Ted Baker seems like London enough to be a global brand, and that was it, and away he went. So he was always in the rag trade. So I've got this guy, this amazing entrepreneur sitting there telling me how stuff works. It's fantastic. But when you get those stories from people and you're sitting on a bit of land and you feel static, you want to get out there and do stuff, I've got to do stuff. I've got to do more. It's got to be more than this.
So Ian, let's talk a little bit about how you actually came into the industry. You did start in iGaming, you rolled into it. Talk us through that and a little bit more about
trying to set up a few businesses myself and with partners, fixed line, mobile telecoms, small to medium-sized enterprises, trying to make that happen, all that kind of stuff. One moderately successful business, sold it, made a little bit of money. But this time I had 4 young daughters under 5 and a little bit of money. And I'm going, I don't know what to do next now. I don't seem to be really succeeding as the entrepreneur that my father was. What am I going to do, basically? So I invested that money and self-funded this MBA. I just wanted to formalize some experience. One of my business partners had done one at Imperial, and he was always amazing. And I was great. He was speaking a different language to me, which I didn't get, right? So, okay, I'm going to do that too. And it was a wonderful year, 15 months or so, and I loved it. And then I came out and I got offered a consulting job. I had 2 jobs. I got offered a consulting job and I got offered a regional sales manager role with an American software company. The consulting job didn't feel quite right, but it was more money. But the regional sales job was like, right, I need to reward my wife to some money. I need to earn some money. So I went and did this regional sales in this enterprise software company called Moxie Software. And if you've ever seen Glenn Ross, you go into a satellite sales team and they chuck all the bad leads at you. However, what happened was there was this very small one called Betson in their lead list. I had a couple of seats. It was a customer interaction management software. The technology was a SaaS model, and the technology it was a knowledge-based email management tool, basically. So they gave me this tiny gaming vertical telco of finance, which was like crazy. Anyway, I'd had all this experience, and I was so driven because I had 4 kids, no money. I just paid for an MBA and this kind of survive and thrive thing going on. And they taught us how to do business development, this John McMahon story, using a toolkit that I could layer across a bit of strategic thinking. Every time I was finding myself in the sales process, I got up to the decision maker, the economic buyers, they get called. I could talk turkey with these guys. I could talk about strategy. I could talk about this. I could talk about that. I started winning business and it was fantastic. The gaming vertical started to appear, like it opened up, because again, every gaming company was realizing online was just this amazing space and it was growing like crazy. Oh my God, how do we handle all these customer inquiries? We need a solution. Yeah. Can it integrate into OpenBet? Can it integrate into Kana? All that kind of stuff. And so we started knocking down bets on Skybet, Paddy Power, Ladbrokes. I met all these fantastic people, all these great big companies. And there was a guy at Skybet called Peter Nolan, sadly departed, lovely man, who then came from Ladbrokes, went to Skybet, working for Richard Flynn, who was asked by Andrew, I think at Odgers, and said, do you know anyone who knows anything about the gaming space and B2B enterprise level selling? No, put him in touch with me. And Andrew put me in this process with Kambi, and it was a torturous process, and they didn't want me initially. There was some other guy, and the other guy didn't take it. Bear in mind, it was probably quite a big risk. And then they came back just about 6 months later. About 6 months, this process ebbed and flowed, and Andrew came back and said, "Look, actually, they want to talk to you again. Would you go over to Stockholm and meet with Anders Strom, Christian Nyland, one of the most amazing, charismatic entrepreneurs, founder of Unibet, just an amazing guy, honestly, and Christian." Quite an incredible leader. Eric Lundberg, who's there now, really smart people. Yeah, gave me the chance, basically. They gave me a chance. Come in as the CCO. We've got, obviously, our big customer, Unibet. We've got PAF, who we're trying to build out a front end. And we're going to try and sell this as a service. Do you think you can do it? Yeah, I think I can do it. And that was it, away we went. It was a struggle at first, because trying to sell this outsourced managed service into the UK market at that time was interesting, because we had no fractional odds. So that was a challenge in the first instance. But we got there in the end, and what I learned about this team of people was this Scandinavian Consensus culture way of working was quite incredible. Anders and Christian handpicked people who were sitting on this management team. Jonas Janssen, who was the head of trading. You had a guy called Christian Freeberg, who was incredible, who was the head account manager, ended up reporting to me. Another incredible guy called Tony Johansson, who's now set up Wonderino and phenomenally successful brand, And these guys were just incredible. They helped me through some personal stuff in the first 3 to 4 months. I managed to knock down a deal by doing a deal with Ed Ware at 32 Red. He was one of our first customers outside of some of the Spanish market. Ed was brilliant. Thank you, Ed, because he turned me down first. He was going to go with SB Tech. Yes. I said, Ed, he said, Ian, this is not what you want to hear. I know this is not what you want to hear. I remember those words. I said, Ed, can you please talk? So we met up in a hotel. Obviously, Ed being Ed, was stepping at the Savoy or something. And I said, hey, look, can we just talk? There's a few things I need to talk to you about. I'll put as much of my learned skills and sales and business development on him. And he changed his mind, bless him, and he gave us the business. It set me off in the Kambi journey after a while. But what I learned from that consensus culture was that we would meet regularly as a team, in person, in face-to-face. We would discuss all of the different topics, and we would share and debate. And sometimes it got very robust. Christian was always making the decision. He would be guiding North Star all the time. And that strength of vision is what makes Kambi one of the best delivery organizations in the industry. It's phenomenal what their business has done in regulated markets. I mean, it doesn't take any money from non-regulated markets. So when you think about that in terms of the competitive environment that it faces, that experience of working with those guys, how they work with teams, build teams, recruit, keep their eye on the goal, look at every single problem with an open mind and intellectual rigor, and they try to work things through. You don't always get it right, but it was a very interesting process. And of course, as I grew with the business, I got more responsibility and recruited, owning the marketing, owning some of the branding, recruited people like Max. That was great. Max has gone to do brilliant things. It was just a wonderful journey. And I think it was a successful journey, right? This is a wonderful and successful journey, and it felt like a team effort. And it comes to an end and you move country and you realize, oh, my goodness, this is a very different culture. When you've got someone who is running, when you've got a leadership team that's running a corporate beast that's an S&P 500 listed business, when you're working with people who really understand the product and the technology, it's a different kind of dynamic, because actually they're taking a lot of the decision-making away from you. And actually that's very interesting. And I think that's a learning to take forward. They are very different environments. When we talk about what do you find when you go in there, learning for me is my expectations. Are you really thinking through what you're stepping into? And do you know have you got the tools to succeed? Are you the right kind of person for that role? I think in the past I thought, yeah, I can do this. And now I think I can do some of that, but maybe I can't do all of it. And maybe I need people around me.
I want to dive into the whole switching off and being off grid and fly fishing. One of your big hobbies. One of the things that you said that I loved is the fish ignore you rather than ask for anything. Talk to me a little bit more about that attraction of silence. And is that a flight from the zero-sum game of politics of the industry, or is it where you really feel that you're living your dream? Is it where your best ideas come up? Or what is it for you? What does it help you with most?
Some people run marathons. David Flynn might swim from Malta to Gozo. Incredible, right? I've always found that being in nature and fishing subconsciously quiets my mind and allows you to focus on something. Look, in the last 5 to 10 years, holistic practices are much more common and integrated into business life, and they're extremely important, into some kind of well-being, right? I really do believe that. But for me, the act of fishing is not necessarily conscious breathing or meditation, which isn't for everybody, especially if you're a hyperactive, want to do stuff kind of person. It's very difficult. Whereas fishing allows you to be somewhat active, but at the same time, your mind is inactive. And somehow it partitions that. And that experience, my mind is completely relaxed, Mostly I've caught nothing because I'm hopeless, Sometimes I catch something. And you've got a story to tell about a fish that got away, or you've got one in the bag, and you go to some absolutely stunning spots. I remember being in Ireland on the River Blackwater. A fantastic lady, the Irish fly fishing salmon casting champion, taught me to salmon spay cast on the river. I spent 3 days on a stretch of the River Blackwater. Now, I didn't catch anything in 3 days. I stood up to my waist in waders, practicing spay casting. I had a baby otter float down in front of me, eating a fish. On the third day, I spent 3 days in the cold water trying to catch one. And this little baby otter swims past, almost like thumbing his nose at me, like, oh, you've got this fish, and you can't, just literally eating it, like no more than 3 yards in front of me. Amazing. For me, that's life. I do find it meditative. And I've actually when I was at Inspired, I took my team out fly fishing. We had a team day out fly fishing, which I think we all enjoyed greatly, actually. So I would highly recommend any kind of meditative experience like that. Whatever fits.
I had Max Meltzer on the podcast, and he was talking about how he goes gardening and journals. He thought we were going to talk about business, and we ended up talking about gardening and journaling to his daughter on the podcast.
Look, I think it's important. At the end of the day, we might be leaders in an industry, we might have had careers, but we're all people at the same time. It takes a lot out of you trying to make these businesses grow, especially what Max and Damien have done with Strive is incredible. I mean, it's not easy to break away from a business like Kambi, find the right sets of investors and technology to go to market in a very complicated market like North America and claim a position and execute on that in the tribal market, in the commercial market. It's hard work. And I think Max and Damien will be credited. I'm actually surprised Max got time to go gardening, actually. So credit to you.
Ian, I want to talk a little bit about the reality of business, right? So you moved, one of the things that you said that really hit me is moving family, right? So I've done it as well as an expat. You moved your whole family, then walked into your first board meeting and found that the company was on the verge of insolvency. How do you lead a team through that? How do you lead your family through? Like how do you deal with that?
That was a shock. First board meeting, actually prior to kind of my formal start date. Sat in the board meeting, met the stakeholders, met the investors, founders were there, went through the numbers, looked at projections. Obviously I wasn't contributing, just I was an observer. It's like, hang on a minute, surely there's another page here. We're going to turn over one more page and it's all going to be all right. But it wasn't. Came out of the meeting, great guys, great, fantastically talented. It was a shock. However, I do think that what I went through with my dad's business, trying to get that off the ground, I don't think it was so derailing, because I think this kind of survive, thrive mentality is baked in a little bit. And you sort of go, okay, fine. The mentality I had was, okay, we've got to figure out commercially, how's this working? We got to find some revenue because this looks like there's an insolvency path. It felt like when you have product-led founders who are globally minded, the commercial function had been somewhat neglected. And I think that can happen when you have a high growth environment. Everybody's just rising with the tide and it doesn't become really difficult to do business. It can actually just be quite easy to do business. But a lot of the processes, some of the deals are bad. People get maybe they are a little bit lazy, sloppy, whatever, commercially. That's what I found when I went into that environment. I don't think it's through any fault of anybody. The pattern had emerged such that there was a culture of, oh, it's easy, the next bit of money is around the corner, this operator will survive. And what was actually happening was operators weren't delivering the revenues, customers weren't going live, no revenue taps were being turned on. And it's symbiotic in a revenue share relationship. And so then everybody's relying on these little setup fees. And, it was just a bit of a mess, quite honestly. And I think a not uncommon story in the industry. And so the first thing to do was really sit down with all the team and figure out if they really wanted to be there. Do you really want to be here? Because this is the journey we're going on. When you have those conversations, you do find some natural attrition, but then you find some really talented, hardworking people that are just basically holding the thing together and separating out those people and nurturing those people and trying to find a pathway for them to succeed was actually one of the most gratifying things of that experience. One of those people is actually in the industry, absolutely smashing it now. And I see him at conferences. I just love him to pieces. He's brilliant. I feel there were two people in that environment. The first thing to do was to look at the personnel around us, look at how we could find revenue, look at where we could save some costs, which is always a shame, but it's necessary. Then try and tighten up how we worked with the actual processes of going to market and generating revenue. So it was a challenging time.
That's not the first step, right? The first step is actually your own mindset, because you come in as the growth guy. You come in as the chief revenue officer or the chief commercial officer. You're going to generate revenue. And now all of a sudden, you're like the chief crisis manager officer,
It's a good point, Leo. You come in thinking that there's steady state activity. There is a number of customers. We're going to reposition ourselves. We're going to just shift who we target. We're going to go into these new markets, all the standard business development stuff. And actually what you do, you land, and this has happened twice actually in my career in gaming. You actually find yourself in kind of a turnaround environment, which is, oh my God, everyone's hair's on fire. There's organizational malaise. There's silos within the business units. And it's like, how do you try to keep your leadership team and your mentors on side and talk about the harsh realities of what you're finding and still keep a team motivated and deliver on the revenue targets you've got? Yeah, that was absolutely the most challenging thing. And of course, there's a third factor here, the capability to deliver. It's this huge backlog of opportunity that you can't execute on. You end up in a crisis mode. And what I think I found most, which you can find being in a survive and thrive mode, but when you're in a turnaround situation, what that requires is patience actually, and calmness and understatedness and rational conversations all the way through, not panic. And I think what happens is, I look back on myself, I say, if you were going to do that again, how would you deal with it? I would deal with it differently, for sure. I would definitely slow down and be very consistent and measured in that moment. I wasn't behaving in the senior fashion that I needed to behave. I wasn't the safe, calm pair of hands that was going to guide us through these choppy waters. I became somebody that was what I'd learned, which is survive and thrive, and just go really hard at the commercials to keep filling the top of the bucket up and figure out how we're going to rip this up and generate more revenue. And actually what we really need to do is just stop and think a little bit. Slightly impacts how you go and do things in terms of how you deal with certain personnel, how you set up your commercial teams, and more importantly, the relationships you have with the other stakeholders or your peers within the business. Because there is a leadership vacuum, because the business probably wouldn't be where it was if there wasn't one in the first place, right? And what I learned then is this survive and thrive mentality can come in really hot, because that's what you know and that's what you've leaned on to succeed. But actually, if you do that, you're kind of fueling the fire a little bit in a sense that there's already an organization under stress. There's already, an organization that's thinking, how do we deal with these things? Pushing harder for more delivery, more technology, more customers or new markets, and just not taking a step back. That was definitely something that in hindsight, I would definitely do. And because actually it's the nature of the beast. You're brought in to drive revenue and drive growth. But actually when you get there and you say, whoa, I need to do that, but actually this organization kind of right now just needs to stop and just think about how we can just consolidate a little bit, re-baseline where we are. And I think managing that is something that at that point in my career, I didn't have the experience to observe, and perhaps made some good decisions, did some things that were necessary, but ultimately should have been more intent on listening the pulse of the business in the context of the market and just trying to drive revenue and growth.
Leadership, calm people down, be the steady state person so that everybody can perform. It's a mistake that almost everybody makes, right? They go in frantic because they want to make a difference. You were talking about a second situation. That was one situation where you walked into that boardroom and you found a company. That was a second situation, I think, was the one where company was under cyber attack, right? So tell me a little bit more about.
What happened is that it was already under an enormous amount of stress with some regulatory issues. It had a cyber attack, which was also public knowledge. So the leadership at that time was doing tremendously well, quite honestly, to deal with that. And then they got this is a new face coming in 4 months into the process. One of the largest customers was cleaning up its customer base, which had some other impacts on revenues, which the CEO has gone public. And so what I found myself in was this. And then, of course, you had all the legacy complexity of a business that you didn't anticipate either. And this is, honestly, this is maybe just a little bit naive, but it's what you find, isn't it? And you open up the box, right? And you find regulatory complexity, you find market complexity, you find the governance model is perhaps not what you thought it might be. So you're dealing with these challenges. And of course, what happens is, as a commercial beast with this kind of survive or thrive kind of mentality, you're like, right, let's push harder. Let's try and find solutions and bring solutions. And again, it was, I think, where this has succeeded hugely in other environments. Perhaps in this environment, it was time to keep on saying, I don't think I can do this on my own, leading these 98 people who have been in this business for a long time. I don't think that I can do this on my own. I need more help. And I think in hindsight, what I should have done is consistently gone with that message and had the courage to say, I can't do this. What I mean by can't do this, I can't give you short-term fixes to these numbers.
What was preventing you from saying that, though, Ian? What was in the way?
I think it was pride, but also you want to help. It's come into a business that succeeded over many years and has taken a dominant position in the market. And okay, you find different things sometimes under the hood, and it's a fabulous management team, a leadership team, but there's an inflection point for the business. So what I thought was a steady state growth story was actually a turnaround. Started to try to get that hard messaging across. Guys, there's structural issues here. I think we need to turn this around. I didn't manage to get that message across in a coherent way. So then my fallback position was, and this is really important, Leo, in reflection, is a little bit based on fear of failure, right? So if I couldn't solve that quarterly number problem, it was my fault. I wasn't good at solving this gap in the numbers. Actually, what I think I could have been able to do is consistently, you can put plans in and say, look, it's 2-3 year plan. That's what you do. But if you can't get your message across, which is, I really do need some more help than what we've got here, and I don't think I'm managing this very well, it's not an easy conversation to have. And it's not an easy conversation to have consistently, right? Because actually it's like, well, let's revisit the plan. Let's think of something else. Let's open this hood up. Let's open that hood up. And actually, I think the stress of that, and in combination with the idea that, again, you can be heroic and find miracle solutions to these problems. And because you're in this quarterly reporting environment, sometimes I didn't manage to create enough space and listening time to calm down and make a difference. I want to impress. I just came in way too hot. I think that's what I learned. You have to ask for that support to say, I need some help with this, and create some space for that. Because I think if you don't, you find yourself isolated. And I think I found myself feeling isolated in that environment. So it's quite painful to talk about, but it's because it feels like failure even now. But I don't know if it was or not.
Why does that still feel like failure? And why did it feel like failure then and still now?
If you're used to hitting numbers consistently through your career as a commercial or CCO or CRO, and you're consistently driving growth, I used to work for an enterprise, US American enterprise software company. And that's the way I got into this space. We found this vertical. That company, their leadership at that time were schooled in the John McMahon sales leadership go-to-market techniques, right? So this is an extremely successful guy who built a kind of go-to-market business development sales toolkit that I'd got schooled in, fresh out of an MBA that I'd funded for myself because I wanted to kind of learn some stuff. And it was like, okay, so I've tried to understand business and business context and sales and business development, but now I've been given a toolbox with these framework of tools that you can use to help you understand business and sales processes and make the forecasting real. Is a deal real? And is money going to come in? Plus, if you combine that with some of the learning you got elsewhere, all of a sudden it felt like golden. And I started succeeding massively in that environment year on year just because I had these toolkits. And so then I moved into other places. You start to succeed using some of these toolkits. And so this was the first time I couldn't seem to affect any change. I couldn't get something rapidly. So you could lay out a strategic plan, but short-term execution to find revenue on 2 to 4 quarter basis was very difficult for me. And that's why it felt like a failure. And I think the pressure, when you've already got a stressed organization, struggling with a cyber attack, the delisting, the regulatory challenges that it had, and then, you've been brought in to try to grow the business, but you find yourself in a turnaround context. Maybe there's a mismatch of job description, skill set, and how you go to market to execute. In hindsight, it was this idea that you survive and thrive, which means you go hard at trying to drive growth. And if that meets an organization that is already stressed and trying to find solutions.
I mean, any board position, right? Any leadership position, you face choices that are impossible, right? Like there are literally 0 good options and you've just got to choose the least bad one. And then, I mean, the thing is, Ian, you're incredibly hard on yourself, which is very typical for a high achiever. You're incredibly hard on yourself, reflecting back. And it's so easy to do. We all know that. It's so easy to do, looking backwards.
I think what happens is when you go into these leadership roles, you're challenged with how do you create enterprise value is often one of the big questions at board level. Whether it's a business backed by private equity, a business that's, shareholder is listed on the S&P 500, whatever it is, and shareholder value, enterprise value. And so how do you connect that overarching goal with execution in the business? It's really a fundamental part of what the CRO, CCO should be doing and looking at and saying, okay, well, this is what we're intending to do. This is how we create some value. How are we going to execute on that, right? Fundamentally, when you come into a role and you're looking at creation of enterprise value, we know what they're trying to do. Okay, we're going to build some value into that business. We're going to go into regulated markets and we can connect the dots on which regulated markets they might be. And we're going to create enterprise value. And get some good returns for all of the stakeholders involved. The challenge I found is that you walk in, start scaling a business, and you can take a position in the market, you can build a team. We need visibility on the pipeline, so you start putting the pipeline and the forecast into the board meeting, into the management meeting. Everybody's aligned. Oh, this is exciting. Look, we've got some tier 1 opportunities. We've got an opportunity with a state lottery. Fantastic. Everyone's excited. You've got the team galvanized around the messaging. Everyone's doing their jobs at the business development level. But then what happens is, we didn't know and we haven't scoped this properly, for example, and especially in the B2B environment, classic. It's not scoped because, there is a sort of premise that this is a SaaS business model. Just flick a switch, do business, and it's market ready. I haven't seen that operate well in the gaming industry. It's not SaaS. There's too much regulatory complexity, unless you're not in regulated markets, of course. See, what happens is the customer has different sets of requirements. It needs to be scoped. How do we get that launched? So you start tightening up the process in order to make sure product, delivery, technology are informed. Let's tighten up the process. And that's fine. You can tighten up the process as much as you like, but fundamentally, if the people aren't aligned around the mission, and if you as a management team haven't galvanized around, aligned with the senior stakeholders of the board, isn't aligned, and everyone's on the same page. And what I mean by being on the same page is not lip service. It's, we're all living and breathing the fact that we have to get delivery done and we have to get our technology correct because that's what makes the money. It's not the business development team making the money. They're developing the business and finding opportunities and markets to place the technology, which we then have to deliver, which relies on an operator to then operate it to the best of their abilities. So that's the process you go through. Commercially, trying to find the right operators in the right markets, but you're relying on the delivery and the technology teams to execute, because actually that's the symbiotic relationship. And I feel like that has to be ingrained across everybody. Eat, sleep, breathe, delivery. Because if you don't, in B2B environments, you're going to get pulled all over the place. The problem is, I don't think there's often enough space for people, because it generally isn't a process problem. Sometimes it can be a process issue tactically, but strategically it's about people. And if people agree that yes, this is what we need to do, or no, we can't do this, so we can't go into that market in that time frame, we're going to have to figure out a different way, business development team.
What would you advise there, Ian? Because I've seen it in so many different businesses, right? Where you have a very strong commercial function, they fill the pipeline, there's customers coming through, and then it gets stuck in delivery and it takes forever to go live because of whatever operational or technology, whatever it is. So when you find yourself in that situation with tension between tech, operations, and business development, what would you advise people from a commercial background to maybe do differently? Because the normal response is to just be angry and upset and fight each other, which is completely not helpful. How would you approach it looking back now?
There's a number of layers to this, actually, Leo, because it depends on where you are in the market, you know? So if you're working with a state lottery, let's say, you will have a very structured, slow, methodical set of processes that you can work through. And that's a very different kind of delivery mechanism. And actually everything's scoped, everything's documented, there's penalties for deliveries, all of that's a very different. However, if you come down to the tier 3, tier 4 level, and you've got somebody who has a small budget, say, it could even be a couple of 100,000, 500,000 in getting their venture started. The crime is to kill their business through non-delivery. You're killing them. It's terrible. And so, again, it's a value question. What are your values around this? You have to question your own values because you're under pressure to get deals. You have to really work with your team internally and get to know your technology, get to know your regulatory environment, get to know your prospective customer or your prospect. And it's up to you as that commercial person to navigate the delivery risk. It's ultimately you're responsible for that relationship. You're responsible for bringing and partnering with that customer, whether they're a tier 3, tier 4, 2, 1, whatever. Generally in the bigger opportunities, there's more of a team effort. So it's a slightly different set of circumstances. But I do feel like the CEO and the commercial lead are ultimately responsible for how that gets executed. And I think the commercial lead's role is to ensure all elements make up a delivery, an executable delivery or an on-time delivery. There's always going to be some slack, you know, whether the program manager is working with the project manager and the product team. Be very honest about it. Oftentimes, the commercial function isn't necessarily let into that conversation, or they feel like it's not part of their job description. And I think as soon as you get there, you're failing straight away. Because if you think as a commercial person that your job is just to throw a few names into an organization and get them to deliver, that's not going to get you any.
But also the cultural fit, right? So we often talk about cultural fit as in what does the culture of the business look like? And people find it really difficult to put finger on what that actually means. But, you know, you've kind of just described a lot of it, right? Where you have Stockholm-based kind of, you know, more Scandinavian approach to decision-making versus an American, which is even very different in Vegas versus New Jersey, whatever it is, right? So different types of people, turnaround CEOs versus scale CEOs versus cash cow CEO. You know, there's different types of people for different types of businesses. Do you think that's true? Or do you think that, you know, if you're talented, you could kind of fit in any business, or do you feel it's somewhere in the middle?
I think it's true. It doesn't mean you can't adapt yourself. I'm a survive and thrive person more than I am a calm, measured, you know, I accept that about myself. I'm learning to be more calm and measured. And it's a journey, right? Because my personality type, my approach to market is fast, it's high impact, it's building trusted relationships. What I found in Kambi was a culture that could absorb. It was a good trade-off. It was that measured approach, adding value in the energy that I would bring to that environment. Again, it comes back to your value set. If you can recognize what you're good at and you're feeling compressed, using a sporting analogy, if you're a creative midfield player and you're asked to do defensive duties, you're not going to fit very well into that team and you're not going to succeed. So if you can try and find that, and it's not easy, Leo, right? It's not easy to know and learn. Some people maybe organically, oh yeah, I know I'm that kind of person. I'm always going to be like that. Others, I don't know. Yeah, I agree with you. I think you certainly can adapt yourself and skills are transferable, but your personality type isn't.
Great advice. Okay, my last question, Ian. So we started off the recording talking about your 20-year-old self, the situation that formed so much of, the business, and your father passing away, that formed so much of your values and how you lead. If you would go back to that 20-year-old version of yourself standing there on that site, what would you tell him about the next 20 years of storms ahead?
When I became older than him for the first time, he became real to me as a human being, not just a father, a figurehead, a dead father. I saw him as a child, a teenager, someone trying to make a difference, and someone, having a young family. And I saw that, and I saw him as the human being, a fallible, vulnerable, stressed out, whatever. Because the grief, hits you in certain spots. So to answer your question, now what I do is when that comes, I take him with me. He's on the journey, right? So I've reframed all of that to him being on the journey because he never got to live. So what I do with my mentality now, I've stepped out of the industry to learn new things, learn about tokenization, stepped out to learn about prediction markets, working on some very interesting projects to bring back in and understand where this industry is going in the future, because the way capital markets are now viewing tokenization, the way the prediction market space is hot and interesting, is fascinating. So I think when he's there on this journey, because you're actually talking to two of us right now, Leo, you do realize that now. But when I think about that market of the next 20 years, I don't know what it looks like. But what I do know is that time is getting shorter in the sense that we do and learn and absorb, and we are exposed to so much influence these days. It's almost impossible to read. So you have to try and take it a day at a time. And what I would say to him is the next 20 years are going to be probably one of the most interesting in the history of mankind. And he's along for the ride. Let's just do our best and try to remember the learnings of the last 20 and take them into the next 20.
Thank you so much for the conversation and being so open and honest, being so generous with your time. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on the iGaming Leader podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, head over to igamingleader.com for more conversations and insights. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. I'm your host, Leo Judkins, and I hope to see you next week.